What is up, ladies and gents? It's your boy Jermaine Event, main on MMA, and today, ladies and gents, we are checking out a video from the YouTube channel Kombat Capital, ladies and gents, and this video is titled Luke Thomas Exposed the UFC and Paid the Price. I'm a big fan of Luke Thomas and his content, his MMA combat sports journalism. Big fan of Luke Thomas, super crispy content. Let's see. I may already know, like maybe I've seen it in real time, but I didn't realize the black ball was in potentially. I don't know. But, you know, Luke Thomas is more of a clean cut kind of guy, like super articulate. He's a journalist, you know, through and through, very educated guy. And I feel like, you know, I'm not sure what's in this video. I have not seen it, but I would say that it seems to me that like you can try to go that route and be like a top journalist or whatever, like an actual journalist, not a top journalist, an actual journalist. Luke Thomas, Aaron Bronstetter. You can be those kinds of people, but it seems like today, for whatever reason, if you can be an MMA guru or that MMA Joey guy, just a fat dude with an angle down.
You're 30 now, so I'm wondering...
I don't really like you, Luke, so I'm not going to answer your question.
As one of the most popular members of MMA media, it's likely you'll have stumbled across the works of Luke Thomas.
I cannot believe these mongrels think that we are peers. Like, oh my God.
Having covered a variety of combat sports for over 2 decades, it can't be denied that Luke brings valuable insight with his coverage of the sport. However, as the political climate of the UFC shifts...
When he says these mongrels, that's what I'm saying. You can either be an actual journalist like Luke or in Bronstetter or even, James Krause. There's a lot, you know what I'm saying? I'm just like, these are some of the guys I really like. Or you could be like an MMA guru or an MMA Joey. Just an MMA personality, like a content creator, essentially what I am. Right now, I'm not a journalist. If anything, if you give me a job, I'm a columnist. I'm not necessarily a journalist, but I did have a writing job for Arabs MMA.
Openly leftist media members have found themselves being slowly ostracized from the community. And Thomas has been no exception.
People with pink hair and pronouns in their bio, he has to know that they're the type of people that follow him, not legit MMA fans.
Luke Thomas is a liberal first, a left-wing cuck first, then he forms his opinions.
You are on the wrong side of literally everything, then you are a stupid person. You, Luke Thomas, dumb. Figure it out, dude. You can be smart tomorrow.
So is it true? Is Luke Thomas nothing more than a left-wing mouthpiece? Or does he provide an important service by challenging the status quo? Today, we delve deeper into some of Mr. Thomas's more controversial opinions and examine to what extent he's exposed the UFC and might be paying the price. Thomas was born in 1979 in India to an American father and a Syrian-Armenian mother who lived in Lebanon. Thomas mostly grew up in Washington, D.C. While in college, he started training in judo, and while serving in the military, he participated in the U.S. Marine Corps martial arts program. Sometime around 2006, Thomas began writing on his dedicated MMA blog Mad Squabbles, which would serve as a foundation for his media career. Having worked at a variety of different companies, including SB Nation and MMA Fighting.com,
I don't know that, Luke.
Luke now co-hosts the popular...
Nigga had brown hair in the beard. I mean, barely a little bit there. I just know gray hair Luke.
...online sports show, Morning Combat, as well as hosting his own live show each week. When it comes to online content creation, the lines between journalist, content creator, and influencer can become extremely blurry and can really dilute the meaning of the term journalist. Something Luke should be commended for is his honest representation of himself as an analyst and media member, respecting the category of journalism far more than the majority of his peers.
I don't call myself a journalist because I don't think I do the kind of work that justifies the title, but certainly at one point I did. I do think I am media, and I think there's a difference. And not to say that one can't be valued. There's only one way to have value.
I didn't know they were going to talk about the difference right there. I mentioned it. I didn't know they were going to bring it up, but yeah, that's pretty dope. Hold on.
I do believe that there should be a difference.
Yeah. Perhaps one of Thomas's most controversial and often misconstrued opinions are those surrounding performance-enhancing drugs. You'll sometimes hear people claim Luke advocates for a Wild West approach to PEDs, with everyone being allowed unlimited drug usage. But this isn't the case. Luke's thoughts on drug use really revolve around these three questions. To what extent fighters want to be tested? Do fans truly care about clean competition? And what evidence is there to suggest that the UFC is actually safer whilst utilizing strict drug testing? The first question is truly one of fighter autonomy. The idea being that if you believe fighters as a collective have a right to some say over the intrusion drug testing can have into their lives.
A real problem with anti-doping, it's like, if your argument is you can't get meaningful anti-doping without abridging or otherwise running over either privacy rights of athletes or other forms of dignity that they are entitled to, what does that say actually about an idealized version of anti-doping?
The current system would be abusing that right by not allowing fighters any say in the drug testing process.
You'll hear them talk a lot about we have to protect the rights of clean athletes. Clean athletes deserve to have their rights protected. Joe, let me ask you a question. How do you protect the rights of clean athletes? By overrunning the rights of athletes generally. Remember when they had to watch Tim Kennedy shower nude? Remember that? Oh, well, athletes should have to go through this. Why should athletes have to go through these grotesque privacy invasions?
Luke also says that not allowing fighters to receive medical treatment that they otherwise would have had access to also infringes on rights that should exist for UFC athletes.
Obtuse, like how can you have rules about what is allowed that preclude a guy whose shin was broken in half from getting the proper medical care he needs to even be able to play with his kids later in life, much less return to the octagon? You were never, ever, ever asked to be here by a single athlete. You were brought here by the people who kind of control the industry. Let's just be clear about that. You never got athlete buy-in.
The second question, do fans truly care, is a fascinating one. Part of the reason why any sports league drug tests its athletes is to add credibility in the eyes of the public. But if that public concern is mostly performative or misplaced, would it truly hurt viewership if rules around PED usage became more relaxed?
And it never made sense to begin with, where people would be like, oh, my MMA has to be anti-doped. It has to be, otherwise I can't watch it. But of course they would watch any other competitor that didn't do any of those things and never seemed to care.
Thomas further claims a different testing body would allow fans to see their favorite fighters compete more often and at a higher athletic level. And anyone pretending to hold strong principles on the matter would continue to watch, even if there was no testing at all.
They're all going to still watch. They're all just going to be exactly the same way they were before. Guarantee it. Absolutely would bet my life on it. I never, ever.
So far, I don't see Luke as exposing the UFC in this video, as exposing just the hypocrisies in MMA and in combat sports mainly. Mainly MMA. I don't think boxing has the same rigorous drug testing as MMA. He's not exposing the UFC so far. Maybe something else comes later in this video.
Bought that they had a principled stance about anti-doping and fighting. Just didn't believe it.
I think the appetite for scandalizing athletes for taking performance-enhancing drugs, or in the case of Sha'Carri Richardson, just some weed, is not really there. I think it's been dissipated because it's the same thing as I was talking about with the crazy parent. We've been bashed in the head so many times that we're desensitized to it.
The last point tends to be when Thomas receives the most pushback, as he asks if the sport is actually safer with stringent drug testing or not.
Show me the evidence since the introduction to USADA that they have made a meaningful impact on the health and safety of the athletes. Show it to me. I'm waiting.
Now, Luke is right here. There's no data-driven evidence that bringing in USADA made competing in the UFC more or less safe, but that isn't typically what fans are concerned about when it comes to drug testing. Thomas correctly asserts that sports fans tend to not genuinely concern themselves with what's safe for athletes, but they certainly care about what's fair. Luke even acknowledges this, but then moves on to injury rates, as if that's the main point of contention.
It's not to say that if you or I, assuming we're in a similar weight class, and we were competing, we were roughly equally talented, and I was on something and you weren't, that I wouldn't retain an advantage and potentially do damage to you. But I noticed something along the way, which was if you just look at injury rates in any number of different things, concussions, cuts, you name it, from the moment before USADA got there till after they got there, there was no change at all.
But that's the whole point, Luke. People aren't concerned about two clean athletes or two juiced athletes competing. They're worried about those two pools mixing. Luke may think that the effort to try and ensure this doesn't happen is impossible or not worth it, but just because USADA's presence hasn't shown a significant change in injury rate doesn't mean that fighters competing clean aren't at a higher risk of injury when fighting someone who isn't.
And these niggas is not clean. All you motherfuckers are on steroids. All you're proving is that some people are better at masking their drug use than others. That's it. That's all we're finding out here.
In case that PEDs gave no physical benefit to fighting, nobody would use them. The frustrating thing is, Thomas knows this.
You may have shifted who was suffering it, and I don't mean to diminish that is a small thing. That is not a small thing.
But then we'll proceed to have a tenuously related discussion about injury rates.
But if we're just looking at, in the end, how many concussions we got, how many lacerations we got, how many twisted ankles we got, and in the end, there's really no difference in the data.
Regardless of whether you agree with him or not, it seems evident that Luke is asking these questions with the interest of fighters and fans in mind. He isn't simply being polarizing for the sake of views, but is actually building arguments after talking to experts like Dr. Alexander Hutchinson and Dr. Mike Israetel, which is not something we often see from the current wave of MMA content creators. So Luke isn't out here asking for a drug-free MMA, just one that fighters have some autonomy over.
We'll talk about that in just a second. VADA is a much better system. If the UFC ends up picking VADA, the Voluntary Anti-Doping Association, I really don't have much of an issue with it at all. It's almost zero.
Now that the USADA era of strict drug testing has passed in the UFC, it must be said that a lot of what Luke had to say about many fans and media's performative pearl clutching turned out to be exactly that.
And now, here we are about to be on the other side of it, and no one's gonna say or do shit about it.
One of the most important parts of Luke's recent MMA coverage has been the lawsuits regarding compensation and injunctive relief.
Your fighters sued this company and got awarded hundreds of millions of dollars because there was an agreement that they were underpaid. And the judge looked at that hundreds of millions of dollars settlement and was like, yeah, this is clearly not enough.
For many years, Thomas has championed many collective efforts made by fighters to increase fighter pay as a percentage of the UFC revenue, and documented the process to an extent few other popular content creators can match. This has also fed into his broader opinions regarding the monopolization practices by the UFC, whether it's getting fighters to sign coercive contracts, buying out the competition, or refusing to co-promote. The role Thomas has played in alerting the wider fan base to these issues can't—
They don't need to co-promote. And fighters should read their contracts. If they don't like what's in it, don't sign with the UFC. Oh, but I mean, you want what being in the UFC can bring to you. So they're going to sign that contract knowing the terms. And if things aren't working out 5 years down the line, how are we supposed to have sympathy? You were cool with that contract, with that arrangement in the time.
Can't be understated.
Just tell me what monopoly in what other industry or something close to it that you feel like over time genuinely got a—
Like when I was working management a few years back at the grocery store, and there would be these younger people that we'd hire, and I could see what these people, before they came in for their interview, how much they were asking for. Some people were asking for less than minimum wage, all right? Some people were asking for less than minimum wage. I think minimum wage in the state of Wisconsin is probably still $7.25. People were asking for less than $7.25. A lot of these people were starting like 2022, 2023. These people are starting making like $8, $10, right? They would start out making, some of them, $11. Then some of them would hear, I hear that person's making $12. I only make $10. I hear this person's making $12 and they don't do as much work as I do. And I tell them you have to value yourself. What do I mean by that? Before we even saw how they worked, they said, I'm worth this amount of money. If you want my services, you got to pay me at least this amount. And they gave them that. You asked for less than minimum wage. And now you guys are here doing the same job. You work 3 times harder than that person, and they go home with a lot more money than you. Because they put more value on their services when it mattered. And now you're like, oh, I deserve a pay raise. You're not going to get it. You've already set the terms. You've already agreed to these terms. Maybe you'll get a quarter in a year. Maybe 20 cents because you talk a little bit.
Better product out of that, like did more for the customer, did more for the value proposition, did more for their workers, did more for the industry. The MMA model as it exists today, the UFC model, is literally illegal in the United States in boxing. Just think about that for a second. You couldn't even legally do it.
So why does it seem like more and more people in the wider MMA audience are starting to dislike Luke Thomas? The truth of the matter is that Luke is something of a rarity in MMA circles, as one who sits firmly on the left regarding most political issues. Since 2016, the UFC has made a conscious and deliberate effort to become a platform for right-wing politics, which has worked to oust left-leaning fans and media.
But it definitely has homogenized the audience. Definitely it's done that. No question about it. And again, you might like that, you might hate that. Really, it's up to you. But I don't think anybody can argue it hasn't homogenized the audience. It definitely has homogenized.
The way most left-wing media members and content creators skirt around the issue is by simply not talking about their political beliefs, which, although understandable, does nothing to push back against right-wing homogenization in the sport. Given that so many of the major issues with the UFC are inherently political, we should be grateful that Luke is willing to confront these matters from a perspective that grows increasingly harder to find in the space.
So all I'm asking for folks is to say, stop saying you don't want politics in sports. No, nobody wants it where it absolutely doesn't belong. But there are parts where it intersects, especially when you're talking about labor rights and labor law and contract law and who's entitled to what. These have political undertones, whether you want to acknowledge them or not. That's real.
Luke not only warns his viewership of how conservative attitudes can impact fighters from a business perspective, but also how the echo chamber being created could potentially lead to harming impressionable fans by radicalizing them towards backwards ways of thinking.
People have kind of forgotten some of that, and now be like, we're going to backslide into like...
How are you radicalizing them? Can people think for themselves? This is crazy. Like, it's weird when I hear people say things like that. Like, I grew up, I grew up with Eminem in real time. I was a diehard fan of Eminem, like, immediately. And they're like, the news would cover Eminem as he's corrupting the children, getting children to be violent in schools. When crazy things like Columbine would happen, they'd blame it on like Eminem and Marilyn Manson. And so I would listen to this music all the time. And I'm like, I never once had an urge to do something crazy. I thought this guy was telling fantasy stories, like jokes and fantasy. I never thought it was real. He wasn't influencing me to do things just because I was entertained by what he was saying. So when he says, oh, they're potentially radicalizing the youth to think a backwards way, dude, no, man. He's putting his opinions out there. You can think about his opinions, taking that information, think what you think about him. Maybe it changes your viewpoints on certain areas, but that's definitely not a problem if it changes, but it's definitely not a problem to take it in. You can disagree with what he's saying, right? That's weird.
To think the Enlightenment of 1983 is a helpful compass for 2024 in terms of understanding gay life and the relationship that they have to the rest of us in broader society and how this should all be governed is a joke. But some of you are going to have kids, and some of those kids are certifiably going to be gay. And if you hold on to the stupid ass attitudes that my generation slowly got rid of, your children will abandon you.
But let's look at which two specific incidents got right-wing MMA heads the most upset with Luke Thomas. The first were his takes surrounding the pandemic in 2020, where Luke made a number of videos expressing his concerns that the UFC was behaving recklessly and advocated aggressively for both mask wearing and the vaccine.
I do not respect the worldview whatsoever for the vast majority of people who are like, I don't need to have the vaccine. Sorry, you are the one that is asking for lockdowns. You are the
Dog, this is crazy. In hindsight, in 2024, damn near 2025, you're calling out Luke Thomas for saying he felt like people should wear masks and get vaccinated in 2020. In real time of a pandemic, motherfuckers couldn't go to work, couldn't go get their hair did. And in real time, he was like, dude, let's just get it over with. Let's get vaccinated and get back to real life. There's a lot of people on that side of the fence, a lot of people on the other side of the fence, but a lot of people that feel like the government should not be allowed to just put these restrictions on people. There's good there's good people on both sides. But, yeah, I think it's weird, okay, to go back and say, yo, he called for people to wear masks and shit like that during the pandemic, like during the shutdown. They just shut down the NBA, MLB. They shut down everything.
that is asking for masks.
Upon reflection, Thomas felt that he had perhaps gone too far with his convictions surrounding mask mandates and vaccines, and proceeded to make an apology video in which he admitted to having too much faith in medical institutions, but still maintained a cautious attitude to the virus as an appropriate response.
To me, it looks like the evidence is pretty clear insofar as I can tell that mask mandates do not work. Okay, let's talk about the vaccine. As far as I can tell, all right, so let's get to it. Was the vaccine, including by me and other folks, and particularly the scientific establishment, was it oversold? Yeah, it was. It was oversold.
While some appreciated Luke's honesty and willingness to admit he'd made mistakes, others took it as an opportunity to declare victory for the COVID conspiracy theory club, and right-wing commentators responded in typically unhinged fashion.
You, Luke Thomas, you wanted us dead. I will not forgive and forget that at all.
And just consider for a moment that you might be wrong.
I followed Red Pill back in the day for like a couple days. And then I started to see the hatred he was speaking about certain topics. I was like, I can't watch this nonsense. I didn't know Jesse on Fire was wild. He gives me Wes Watson energy. I can't really watch his videos.
On literally every single topic that you talk about.
But the next heinous crime of Luke Thomas could not be so easily looked past.
No, he didn't. No, he did not.
You have a problem with raising awareness to child trafficking? That's what it is. That's what the whole beef is about. That's why he's so pressed.
This guy, he laughs at the idea of children being trafficked into the sex slave industry. He thinks that that's a conspiracy, couldn't be real, because he heard it on far left-leaning news outlets like CNN.
In a YouTube live stream, Luke Thomas received a live chat asking him about the movie The Sound of Freedom, to which he replied,
Sounds of Freedom. Is that the QAnon movie?
Yeah.
And that was simply too far.
You said that on YouTube. You said that on YouTube to the MMA community.
Isn't it?
You said The Sound of Freedom.
I didn't know too much about it, but that's honestly what I had heard. That it was like made by the QAnon people. Is that not, yo, chat. Let me know in the chat. Was that not a QAnon thing? That's what I had heard. I had just assumed, and then I had heard that and honestly moved on. Like,
is a QAnon movie on MMA YouTube. That came out of your mouth.
Now, let's first examine what
That
Luke
nigga need to
said
chill.
before getting into the hilariously over-the-top tantrums being thrown by other YouTubers.
Jesus.
Although he's clearly being flippant with this comment, Luke describes The Sound of Freedom as a QAnon movie. So, what does he mean by that?
In which Jim Caviezel, outspoken QAnon advocate Jim Caviezel, the film would not be troubling the charts or this program if it hadn't been involved in, if Trump hadn't done screenings of it, if a bunch of nutball right-wingers hadn't come out and said, oh yes, you know, such an important film, such an important film.
But I'm sorry, I can't take seriously a movie on child trafficking being pushed by and starring an out-and-out conspiracist who dabbles in QAnon and anti-Semitism, suggests elites are behaving like vampires with kids, and even now claims Donald Trump is the new Moses.
There was a great deal of political tribalism surrounding the film, with it being weaponized on both sides. Leftists would say those who enjoy the film supported QAnon, while those on the right declared anyone who didn't like the film was actually instead in favor of child trafficking.
If the film's rabid fan base weren't so set on thrusting this film into the culture war at every opportunity, then there wouldn't be any need to talk about the politics surrounding it. Criticism of the film or its creators isn't an endorsement of child trafficking.
So when Luke joked that the film was a QAnon movie in a passing comment, do we really think that he was trying to suppress awareness of childhood trafficking?
No.
Luke Thomas, the type of guy to jump to an accusation that Andrew Tate is a trafficker, a human trafficker, but deny the reality of child trafficking.
Okay, to come to
Deny
this
the
conclusion,
reality?
you have to be so disingenuous that it's hard to describe.
And dude's
Taking what
trash.
Luke said and extrapolating from that the notion that he denies child trafficking ever took place is utterly ridiculous. He just thought the movie starred and was produced by morons, not that the subject of the movie was a fantasy. Get a grip. But Luke is undoubtedly paying the price for not towing the Republican line for the UFC. Even when it comes to in-ring sponsorships, the UFC is trying to distance itself as far as it can from anything that could be seen as left-wing or woke.
There is a purge going on, and it's quiet, and it's somewhat invisible to people who are not like steeped in this.
Luke has done a good job of not tying his career to having great relationships with the UFC higher-ups, and so the impact of being denied access is not as devastating as it would be for other media members to speak out.
They would facilitate you a little bit, like, hey, we'll help you get this interview, we'll help you get this interview. Not for everybody, it would only be for certain outlets or certain people. And then they would begin to, over time, like, demand concessions, like, hey, you know, we didn't like the way you asked questions in this last interview, you know, we're not going to give you any more after that, or, you know, some kind of way where it's like you built a business or a mode of coverage that was reliant upon their facilitation of it. I learned pretty quickly that I didn't want to do anything that they could take that away from me.
But this doesn't mean that Luke hasn't suffered losing numerous opportunities because the UFC doesn't want to give oxygen to the many stories he wants to cover surrounding their business practices.
In terms of also, like, I cannot tell you how many times there's been a sponsor deal that someone wanted to work with me or a company I was involved with, but it had to work in conjunction with the UFC's interest, and the UFC scuttled the deal. Like that like in the course of their existence, that kind of thing is not uncommon, because baked into the DNA of what they do is the most heavy-handed message control of any professional sports entity outside of Saudi Arabia on Earth.
Throughout this video, we've discovered a lot of unwarranted criticism of Luke Thomas. It's evident that his political beliefs bring him much negative attention, and often this is unfair. This isn't to say we have nothing critical to mention, though. A source of disappointment for a number of Thomas's audience has been his constant shilling of scam products on the show he co-hosts, Morning Kombat. The first of these scams was loan company Money Lion, a company the Center for Responsible Lending described as a loan shark in your pocket.
The federal government has filed a federal lawsuit against Money Lion for two things. One is that it was overcharging service members, and two, it was too hard to cancel subscription.
Once Money Lion sponsorship was up, Morning Kombat then began a paid promotion with the notorious scam company Established Titles.
And defenders have said it's only as much of a scam as the Name a Star registries.
Damn, I didn't know anything about these, honestly. Honestly, I hate when most channels try to sell me products. I kind of just ignore that.
Or NFTs, to which I say, correct. Most of those are scams as well.
In the most recent of the LT and BC scams, AG1 became a sponsor of the show. AG1 promised customers could get all the benefits of eating vegetables by ingesting their extremely overpriced green powder.
I'm not impressed with AG1 being anything more than a multivitamin. If that is how you prefer to take your multivitamin, I think go for it. It does look like it is a pretty good quality multivitamin. But if you think you're getting additional benefits, like you're getting greens from it, that is not likely the case at all.
This podcast is sponsored by Athletic Greens AG1. I could have had a therapy session for the cost of this. I've heard on the grapevine that the commissions are up to $50 US, not just per purchase, but every purchase they're on.
Luke responded to the revelation of the scam on his livestream, but didn't provide an entirely satisfactory response.
Are you regretful promoting AG1, which is a scam? Yes, I am. Yes, I am. Which is why I'm being very, very careful about what I do now. I'm sorry to say. I wish I was in a different world. I wish we hadn't done it, but we did. And we thought it was legit. I took it. I mean, I thought it would do something well for me, and I thought it was, but it's just placebo bullshit.
Yeah, placebo.
Although Luke may have had no say in who sponsored the show, it's hard to believe that someone with a lifelong interest in health and fitness wouldn't look into a supplement they claim to be regularly taking and helping sell to others. This plea of ignorance does not sit well, but neither does the claim that it was out of
y'all niggas didn't have to take AG1.
Luke Thomas has built a...
Okay? Y'all didn't have to take it. This is crazy.
Career off of the idea that integrity sits above all else, that making money is not a substitute for moral substance, and that making a quick buck off of other people is never ethical. But as fans of Luke Thomas, it's disappointing to see him point the finger to the scam the UFC is running with one hand, while taking money for advertising scams with the other. Although it doesn't excuse prior behavior, at least moving forward, it appears that Luke and Brian will have more say in who they promote in the future.
That's why we have to exercise real due diligence now. Now we're in the due diligence age. And going forward, you're asking, by the way, we had no control over the advertising before. Now we do.
But if Luke thinks for 1 second I have any interest now in buying toiletries from him, he's cried wolf AG1 too many times.
Programming on this channel is brought to you by none other than our friends at Toiletries. And look what they sent me in the mail.
With that said, this shouldn't undermine the immense amount of good that Thomas brings to MMA. Few have gone to the effort of platforming so many experts and journalists on various topics as he has. From his early days as a passionate blogger to becoming one of the most recognizable voices in combat sports, Luke has consistently challenged the status quo, often risking his standing in a community that can be unforgiving to those who voice dissent. Luke's contributions to the dialogue surrounding these contentious issues has been invaluable. Yet, they haven't come without their fair share of backlash. Ultimately, Luke Thomas stands out as a figure committed to fostering a more transparent and ethical environment in MMA, even amidst the repercussions he faces for speaking truth to power.
So yeah, I didn't know that, shout out to Kombat Capital. That was a dope look at Luke Thomas and the controversy around him. I did not know about people being upset about products. I don't fault him necessarily as much as other people for getting paid to promote a product. If you then choose to purchase a product simply because a celebrity or someone you see, someone you admire or something, someone you watch, not even necessarily admire, you watch this person's show, and then you know for a fact they're getting paid to advertise AG1, here's these greens. As they're saying that, you know they're being paid to say this. And while you know they're being paid to say that, you're like, you in your mind say, wow, he's holding that. That must mean I must buy it. All right. If that's as far as you can think, then it's not his problem that you got suckered in to buying something that you probably didn't need, wouldn't have never even considered until he put that product there. All he did was present that product. Okay. As far as the advertisements, I personally don't hold that against Luke Thomas. I don't fault him for that. I don't feel like he was exposing the UFC too much in there. He was exposing the hypocrisy in drug testing, the hypocrisy in if fans actually care about a clean sport. I don't think they do. I think like we all used to watch. I mean, I never really cared for baseball, but people used to watch baseball, and you had like Mark McGwire and all these people hitting 1 million home runs a season. And then it was like, oh no, everyone was on steroids. We got to stop people from being on steroids. And then there was no more home runs and baseball was boring again. So do people really want, do people really know what they want? I'm not sure. But I don't know. I think people just need to get over themselves. You can't really people on the internet are trolls. On the internet are trolls. They're trying to just find little things to grasp at for Luke because, yeah, there was not much there. That was nonsense. These claims that Red Pill was like he's trying to kill us. Like, you're crazy. That dude is crazy. He needs to take the red pill. You know what I'm saying? That dude's crazy. Take it. Take that back. That dude's crazy. But let me know what you guys think in the comments. Or do you guys feel like Luke Thomas is just a left-wing mouthpiece or whatever that means? I'm not really sure. I don't really care for politics. So, yeah, I don't really care about left or right. I don't really care about either side. I care about people. But let me know what you guys think about Luke in the comments. All right. Do you think there's something that they missed in that video? Is there something more we need to know about Luke Thomas? Let me know in the comments. Thank you guys for being here. Hit that like, hit that subscribe, and I will see you guys when I see you. I'll holla.